What is up, guys? Welcome on out. Final game of the season recap. And unfortunately, some of you may have heard this is going to be the final Bruin Bible episode. We are going to do one more joint crossover episode talking about recruiting with USC and UCLA. So, guys, make sure to check that out. Before we get in,
Thrill, just to be clear though, right? We don't want to kind of confuse the fans. This is unfortunately the last day with Thrill on the Bruin Bible. It's not the last day of the Bruin Bible. It's the last day of Thrill on the Bruin Bible, and so it's a big farewell for sure. But we'll be making some announcements on the other side of the holidays about the future of the show with LAFB and so forth. So a bittersweet day indeed, Thrill. But I don't want to confuse the fans.
Yeah, no, we're definitely going to be moving forward. LAFB is going to have a lot more stuff coming for you guys for UCLA stuff. Let's dive into the advertisement. BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for everything football. BetOnline has every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads to bet on during the games. Think you know your stuff? Get in on our $200,000 mega contest and pick 5 games against the spread every week for your chance at weekly prizes and a share of $200K. When the game's over, head on over to our online casino and get in on our game of blackjack or poker or unwind with one of our over 150 slot games. Head to the website today to get in on the action. Bet online. The game starts here. All right, I think we got enough people in the chat. Let's get this thing rolling. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. What is up, UCLA Bruin fans? Going to be signing off here as this will be my final show. UCLA LAFB will continue to be the strong engine it is for all your UCLA football coverage. Got the madman to my right. What a victory to end the season, 20-13. We got over the hump of Fresno State, man. This was a team UCLA had not beaten since the year 2000, since the millennium. It had been 24, almost 25 years since this occurred. Big-time victory. I mean, I was a little nervous at halftime. You're down 10-6. They get the ball after half too, so they can get all the momentum. Defense flipped a switch in the second half, as well as the offense kind of woke up a little bit. Garber's just closing out his UCLA career with some big time plays. 289 yards of passing, a touchdown, and no interceptions. A lot of things going forward. But Madman, talk to me first and foremost about what you took away from the game yesterday and how exciting it was to maybe close out the season. Winning 4 of your last 6. There is a little bit of string of positivity for UCLA as we head to the offseason.
Definitely will. It was obviously a bittersweet day. And we talked so much about it earlier in the week where it was going to be, what is the disposition of this team ultimately on this last day? We had talked about some key matchups on the field, but this was really going to be about UCLA's enthusiasm and intensity and just willingness to kind of give an A-plus effort over 60 minutes after the heartbreak of the victory bell, after knowing that they're not going to be bowl eligible, potentially. I think there's we'll get to that in a second. But how would they sort of close out this season, and what would their level of motivation be? And Will, to your point, that first half was very interesting, right? I mean, it was sort of what we almost feared was going to happen, that UCLA was going to be a little bit lackluster in terms of the emotions. Fresno State was going to treat this like the big game at a Rose Bowl that we all thought it would be. 12:30 start, only about 35,000 fans out there, quite a few Fresno State fans out there. So the energy was sort of lacking in that first half. And I think down 10-6, to your point, some missed opportunities, but offense playing in spots, defense playing in spots. I think at halftime, they all sort of galvanized together. The 42 seniors galvanized together and said, look, we got one half left. Let's close this out right. Immediately got a 3-and-out and then had a terrific drive there to go up 13-10, courtesy of that huge kind of 35-yard play to Motavao that really kind of set some things up. Harden walks it in 13-10. And then it was kind of a dogfight the rest of the way, Will. I mean, it was 13-10 from 12 minutes, 11 and a half minutes to go in the third quarter, all the way until, inside 4 minutes, 3.5 minutes on that final UCLA drive where the game could have kind of swung either way. And then I thought it was so fitting and symbolic that the very last possession of Ethan Garber's career as a UCLA Bruin, he not only leads them to a touchdown, he not only finds J. Michael Sturdivant for the touchdown, but the drive ended up going 4 for 4 on third down. And he was able to sort of execute in the biggest of moments to be able to close that game. Obviously, it became 20-10. And then at that point, it was just kind of prevent defense to sort of make it 20-13. But a really nice way to close things out. We had talked about kind of three guys in particular that this sort of was going to mean a lot to: Carson Schlesinger, Ethan Garbers, and then ultimately Eric Bieniemy. And I thought Garbers really ended it the right way. I'm sure we'll talk a ton about Schlesinger and what he meant to this game and just this overall season. And then obviously I think we'll discuss more about the future of Bieniemy moving forward. But it's always really nice to end it on a victory. You can feel good about yourself. And now you can sort of turn the page into 2025 with sort of a freshness and a closure. I think it would have weighed heavy on Deshaun Foster if for 42 seniors they weren't able to sort of win this final game at home against Fresno State. The fact that you're able to do that, I think, gives you a sense of closure and a feeling of accomplishment that you were responsible in the right way for these seniors that shepherded this program along through some really good times. Let's not forget, Will, this senior class, their first 3 years, 25 wins over 3 years, which is one of the highest 3-year outputs in the history of UCLA football. The record is 29, and they were able to get to 25, had some big moments there, some near misses, but a couple 8-win seasons, a 9-win season, a bowl victory, and now kind of ending it on their final game. So you got to be feeling good for those seniors in particular moving forward.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of different ways we could start with this. Schlesinger, I mean, just making a case to be the Butkus Award winner. I mean, 15 tackles, had that critical sack to kind of get UCLA's defense and team just back in general. By the way, took the cake for the worst special teams play I've ever seen. When we blocked the punt, Schlesinger did everything right, blocks the punt, they recover, they rip him down with a face mask, they get the ball back plus 15 yards. Took the place, if you remember, the South Alabama fake field goal 2 years ago at the Rose Bowl, which, I mean, was unbelievable. A game we should not have won by all measures. That, I mean, just you get the block, everything's going right. Why do you got to just bring him down with a face mask? The play is nearly whistled dead. That's neither here nor there, though. Carson Schlesinger, I mean, just one of the all-time stories. We've talked about it all year long. A walk-on, a guy that, you know, would be lucky to start one game in a lot of scenarios, starting where he did on the depth chart, has become and blossomed into arguably the best linebacker in America. These are stories you can't make up, and it's a real testament to my MVP of the coaching staff this year, Kaika Malloy. What a fantastic job he did. And, you know, the fearsome foursome, you know, I think our guy, Femi, didn't see a lot in the stat sheet from him yesterday. But Kane Medrano, 3 tackles for a loss yesterday in his final game as a Bruin, a guy that's made countless big plays for UCLA over the years. Jay Choya had his younger brother in the crowd yesterday, who's a top-level recruit for 2027, had a really nice tweet about his times of being a Bruin. He said there were some ups, there were some downs. I'm glad I did it in the blue and gold, you know, kind of to paraphrase what he did. Just an elite defensive group. And, boy, from the second half on, they really were able to stifle this Fresno State offense, allowed only 3 points moving forward from that. But let's talk about our guy Motavao too, because what an all-time performance from the tight end right here. 8 catches, 120 yards. I looked up a stat where coming into the Rutgers game this year, he had only, recorded 3 catches at most coming into a game. He has exceeded that 4 of the last 6 games, including a high of 8 with this final game. He had 6 catches against the likes of Iowa, 7 against Nebraska. Maliki Motavao, I mean, I think he stamped himself a legitimate shot at an NFL future by closing out this game in such a big way. You mentioned the 35-yard catch. Talk to me about our boy Motavao, because what a performance he put out on the Rose Bowl in his final game as a UCLA Bruin. No doubt, Will. And he was the most consistent offensive weapon that UCLA had all season. And to your point, he really came on. We talked so much about this second half, right? I mean, it was a 1-5 start. It was a 4-2 finish. But when you look at Motavao's performance over those 6-game splits, it really correlates with the more Motavao got the ball and the more he got involved in the offense, the more success UCLA was able to have. I think the key with Motavao, Will, is just his overall versatility. You start with the soft hands, you've got the agility, but he's also a really good blocker. He can do so many nice things. And I think he's going to find himself onto an NFL roster next year, no question about it. He was really instrumental
to everything that UCLA wanted to do this year. Because again, as this offensive line went through their journey in 2024, there really weren't a ton of opportunities for Ethan Garbers to be able to push the ball significantly down the field. It's the reason why J. Mike has always been this sort of unlocked, this sort of locked secret, I should say, in challenge to be unlocked. And, there was a couple deep balls there to Gilmer over the course of the season. But by and large, this was an offense that was heavily reliant on TJ Harden out of the backfield, and then Maliki Motavao, and then Loya in the slot when, there was a choice to really emphasize giving him the ball. So the fact of the matter was, when this offense was successful, the ball had to get out really quickly. It was 1-2 read type of plays. And in order to be able to do that, invariably, if you want to have any sense of wanting to control the middle of the field with that type of a style, you have to have a tight end that really knows what he's doing and is really a budding star. And I think the interesting piece with Motavao, Will, is we weren't actually even sure, if you recall at the start of the season, whether he was going to be the primary tight end or not. I mean, let's not forget our good friend Hudson Habermel. We thought he was going to be the tight end that really potentially had the chance to be the leading receiver on this team with all of his athleticism and flexibility. We thought of Motavao more as the blocking tight end that would come into red zone situations. Obviously, Habermill unfortunately gets hurt, close to the start of the season. It puts Motavao in kind of more of a lead role, and he was able to show it all. Not only was he able to fortify his blocking technique and his skills in that regard, but then to be able to balance it and being kind of the explosive offensive player that I think he had the tutelage for, but we just hadn't seen it on film. So I think Motavao is making a lot of NFL GMs very excited. He could be one of those, hidden gems in the draft, even if he's sort of an undrafted free agent. I think he's a guy that has a real opportunity not only to make an NFL roster, but stay in the NFL and be a contributor for many years.
And I think the piece that I've seen over the last 6 games kind of evolved for him. We knew he was a great blocking tight end. We knew he was a very sure-handed pass catcher. The speed he had in this game to get, gains of 30-plus yards, 20-plus yards on some of these catches, we just weren't seeing at the beginning of the season. You know what I mean? So instead of those 10 to 12-yard gains, which you would anticipate with a guy like Motavao, I mean, you remember the touchdown we scored against USC. It was a screenplay. It was all Yak after that for him.
Yes.
And Yak is the key to being a tight end at the NFL level. So Motavao brings a lot of the intangibles. If you can get that 40 right, I'm not the biggest 40-yard dash person, but for a position like the tight end in the NFL as it stands today, if you can get that 40 right or can get that mile per hour, that tracker that they have now, there's a room for Motavao in an NFL tight end room moving forward. So love what he brought to the table, our guy Maliki. And, I want to ask and kind of follow up on this, man, because where do we go from here? We've gotten to 5-7 on the year. We came 1 game short of our ultimate goal of a bowl game. That was what you and I kind of decided at season's beginning would be a successful initial campaign for Deshaun Foster. You're 5-7. You didn't exactly reach your goal. There's a lot of room to grow right here. I mean, you mentioned 42 seniors are moving on. Schwessinger, Toia, these guys aren't coming back next year. Where do we go from here? We've already kind of started with the transfer portal. We got Wilson, the wide receiver from Arkansas. I think you can expect TJ Harden back. I think you can expect Anthony Frias, who was actually getting some, run yesterday, did some nice things. Quasi's coming back, who had a big game himself, 4 catches for 54 yards. But, the outlying things that need to be improved, offensive line was not frankly good yesterday. 3 sacks allowed, 6 tackles for a loss. It's one thing when you're doing that against, the Iowas or, a Big Ten opponent. Doing that against Fresno State is a no bueno type of situation for UCLA. And the penalties, man. 8 penalties, 70 yards. We talked about the undisciplined face mask on the blocked punt. This team has got a long ways to go in those 2 areas, where it's trench play and discipline and just building the roster. Where would you start for UCLA football as we head into 2025?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a great question. I think the work really begins now for Deshaun. This is now the beginning of really his era, because let's not forget, he inherited the job in February, late February. The recruiting class was sort of set. This team's roster was pretty set. What he had control over was the coordinators that he wanted to bring on and the coordinators he wanted to keep. That was really the only strategic decisions he could make at that particular point in time. and then roll with the roster that he had. Obviously, there was a couple of picks there in the transfer portal in that spring cycle, but he was sort of limited in what he can do. This is now his first full off season where he has the full reins of the football program. And so in many ways, Foster's head coaching tenure begins now. And where we go from here is really critical, Will. I think there's three things that he's got to really focus on. The first is, we talked about it, the 42 seniors that are leaving. And that's a huge number, right? I mean, that's a massive number. And there's really going to be a mass exodus of players here. I mean, we're talking about, just from a pure senior standpoint, Toia, Madrano, Femi, KJ Wallace, on down the list you go from a defensive standpoint. Will 11 of the top 12 tacklers on this team are either out of eligibility or most likely will move forward. That's a huge number. So it's not even just the quantity of players, but it's their impact. Then when you look at the offensive, that's just defense. That's just defense. And then when you look at the offensive side, you're obviously looking at Logan Loya, Motavao. You're looking at your two most consistent offensive linemen in Holstige and Carlin. You're looking at running backs 2 and 3 in terms of Keegan Jones and Berger. And then obviously you're going to have a new quarterback next year with Garber's gone. So when you look at the 5 or 6 really key offensive players, and then you look at the 10, 11, 12 really key defensive players, plus the depth that's going away, you're really starting from the ground floor. And I know there was a lot of conversation about, well, Schlesinger has got one more year of eligibility. The fact, Will, that A, he had such a decorated season as a Butkus Award winner. B, he ran out with the seniors. His family was there. And C, just given the window of opportunity that you have and just how physical a game this is, and injuries play such a huge role, Schlesinger needs to go to the NFL and will go to the NFL. And so what does that mean, right? The entire fearsome foursome needs to be replaced next year. Yeah. And now, from an offensive line perspective, you've got DiGiorgio coming back, you got Nicky Prongos, and you got Sam Yoon, but now you got 2 holes that you're going to need to go fill. And let's not forget, there's also this issue known as depth on the offensive line that you need to go address. So there's a real cleaning of the house here, Will, that's going to be taking place. I think next year is going to be frankly a rebuilding year for Deshaun. And so I think he's got to look at this from the perspective of, I'm going to rebuild next year's team. Obviously, when you look at the recruiting class right now, the high school recruiting class is top 40. A lot of 3-star guys that are going to take a while to develop, a year or two to develop. There's a couple of 4-stars, hopefully that UCLA can kind of close on, including Madden at quarterback. But there's a couple of guys there on the trenches that could be huge. But this is going to be a 3-win team next year, roughly. I mean, in terms of, unless there's some staggering improvement with the transfer portal, which I don't necessarily see happening. You're going to get 4, 5, 6 guys to be able to fill slots. This is going to be a 3-win team next year, and it's going to be all about developing the young players. So that's the mindset that I think the fan base, as well as the coaching staff, as well as the players need to take. Now, the question, Will, becomes, what is the level of rope and timeline that Deshaun Foster has, right? Because he's got a 3-year contract. Next year is going to be year 2. And there's 2 ways to take it. Martin Jarman just had a 3-year extension. You have a new chancellor coming in January 1st that's presumably going to have a 5 to 7 year run as chancellor. The fact that Martin Jarman got extended even before that happened tells you that Jarman's going to get a lot more rope over the athletic department than even the chancellor. And it seems like Martin Jarman and Foster have a really tight relationship. I mean, even after the game, they had that big hug, that big embrace. They seem to really embrace each other after every home game. And so with that being said, it feels like Foster's got kind of a longer window to sort of bring in his guys and build kind of the culture, which means that even if 2025 is a rebuilding year and 2026 is a rebuilding year, it sounds like they're going to play this more in terms of the longer haul versus the alternative, where if you had a lot of pressure that you have to win by year 3 or you're not going to get extended, that then forces you, Will, to kind of lean more into the transfer portal, right? And get these 1-year rentals that are going to give you greater output in one particular season, but you're going to have to redo it. It's kind of the John Calipari model in college football. You don't really have a ton of continuity. You're not going to build a ton of long-term culture, but if you want the short-term gains, right? So the question is, do you want the short-term gains, Or do you want a shot at long-term sort of sustainable success? But in doing so, recognizing that 2025 certainly and probably 2026 are going to be rebuilding years where you're looking at kind of 3 to 5 win teams. So these guys grow over time. That is going to be fascinating to see how that plays out, and how UCLA attacks the transfer portal in particular, I think is going to be very telling there. So in terms of losing the talent, Will, in terms of getting it back is one thing. And I think the other piece here is Deshaun needs to find his voice as a head coach. And that's sort of a loaded term, obviously, after Big Ten Media Day. But I think two things he needs to sort of overcome. One is he's talked so much about discipline being his primary pillar of this program. And this is one of the most undisciplined teams in all of college football. And so that cannot stay where it is. You have to reconcile that. And so there's something going on there where you're saying your first principle is discipline, and yet you're the most undisciplined team. So either your message is not coming across, your tactics are not coming across, guys don't believe what you say, you need to sort of enhance the charisma, or you need to sort of bring people around you that are going to really reinforce that message in a way that is receptible to these players and digestible to these players, and in a way that they're actually going to be able to demonstrate it on the field. So I think he's got to find his voice, Will, moving forward. And I think the other piece is going to be, what is the dynamic between him and Eric Bieniemy going to be moving forward? Because you and I talked about this way early, right? I mean, we talked about this way back in the spring, where when we went to spring practice and fall ball, it didn't look like Deshaun Foster was the head coach. It looked like Eric Bieniemy was the head coach, and Deshaun Foster was sort of peppering himself around into different position groups and putting in his inputs. But when you talked about the command, the voice, the center of attention, the center of gravity, the center of energy, everywhere the players were, it was all Bieniemy. And so now moving forward, Bieniemy, I think, has a make it or break it year in year 2 here after the way this offense played this year. So how does Deshaun balance Bieniemy being this fiery, great, potentially offensive coordinator, but also recognizing that he is the head coach? I think he deferred a little bit too much to Bieniemy because of that experience difference. But I think Deshaun needs to find his voice in terms of his pillars, in terms of, what is being received by his players, and then the dynamic with him and Bieniemy. Like, it's got to be clear that Foster's the head coach and Bieniemy is a coordinator, and he's got to sort of figure that out. So to me, it's going to come down, Will, in closing, player development. What's the timeline with the Chancellor and Jarman, and then finding his voice? I think those are the three things. If I were Deshaun Foster, that's where I would be focusing my calories.
Yeah, and I think when Jarman made the decision to hire Deshaun, it was with the intent of, hey, you're learning on the job, so we're going to give you a little extra time in this process. That was the point of hiring a guy like Eric Bieniemy in the first place, right? Was this guy's been a coordinator at the very least. You can learn from him. And I agree with you. I think he deferred a little bit too much in year 1, but it's one of those jobs where you can only learn unless you do. It's like riding a bike, right? Being a head coach at the college football level. So while we didn't reach that goal, he still made some nice gains at the end of the year. I don't want to completely write off the Deshaun era just yet, but next year is going to be critical, and you're losing pretty much everything that made you a good or a decent football team this year. So you got to kind of retool that. Discipline thing is very real to me. And, I've had this thought in my mind. I would, we are fortunate enough to be close enough to where the Navy SEALs are in San Diego. I would send the football team out there.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Send them out there. Do whatever it takes to make this team disciplined, because your lack of discipline was mind-blowing this year for it being the first pillar of your success. You got to do whatever you can to build this team up. I've seen different quarterback camps and different football teams have the honor and the privilege of training with some of the most mentally tough, disciplined people there are in society, which are these Navy SEALs. Go train with them, man. Like, it may not be that scenario, but find what fits your football team and the ideal situation of what a disciplined team looks like, and have them model that, because you can only go up from here. 8 penalties for 70 yards against Fresno State. I mean, that nearly cost you the goddamn game yesterday. Like, you got to be better than that when it comes to football. So completely agree on that front. And when it comes to the transfer portal, guys, we are finally in an era where you can make a difference in the transfer portal yourself. Hell, Michigan just got their quarterback because an alumnus opened up his wallet. I'm not calling all of our alumnus Larry Ellison, but guys, Champions of Westwood is right there. Maybe it, requires an email to go into Casey Wasserman or one of these big time, donors when it comes to UCLA. But you guys can make a difference. You guys want to see your football team be successful and beat that team across town. Open up your wallets, open up your hearts, go get those guys, man. It may take, 20 to 30 bucks, but if everyone does it, that becomes a lot of money where you can put to a different player. So look at Champions of Westwood. I think that's a very key route for UCLA if you guys want to get things rolling with that. So, yeah, I think there's a lot to look forward to when it comes to the NIL side of things. Do you have a point to follow up on that?
Yeah, no, Will. It's so well said. And I think there's also one other element here that I think we need to sort of look at. And it is going to be Chancellor Julio Frank. Because, Will, I think for fans who are getting restless about what the future of UCLA football will hold, and we've talked about this in the past, you have to have certain policies, like it or not, within your university if you want to prioritize football. And what I mean by that specifically is you're going to have different admission standards for football players, and you're going to have different majors for football players. There's just a reality there. And we can talk all we want about what higher education is supposed to be and what equity is supposed to be and all of those things. I mean, those are all very fair points. But the reality is, if you want to prioritize football, you need to have a separate admissions track for football players, and you need to have separate majors for football players. And it has nothing to do with intelligence. It just has to do with how much time goes into being a college football player. You cannot treat being a college football player or a decorated high school player with aspirations of Division I college football in the same vein and having the same bandwidth and availability to do all of the things that a traditional student will do. And this is the thing that Chancellor Charles Young knew so well and so intimately. And it's not rocket science that over his 25 years as chancellor was some of the best football that UCLA has had. It was under Chancellor Young that Donahue was able to succeed. It was the 3 Rose Bowls in 4 years in the 80s. It was the 8 straight against SC in the 90s. It was the 20 straight with Bob Toledo. And so all of that translated into really tangible success. Albert Carnesel, Gene Block Albert Carnesel in particular didn't believe in that. And he believed that academics is first, research is first, medical is first, service is first, and football is just kind of an extracurricular activity. He did away with those policies. He did away with those systemic mechanisms to be able to have top flight talent. And you saw that. And Gene Block basically just took what Albert Carnesel did and kind of kept the status quo. So Julio Frank plays a huge role in this, January 1st, because if he sees the value as somebody that went to the University of Miami and was the president, saw what big time football was all about, and sees how galvanizing a mechanism football is for alumni, for students, for parents, for donors, he's going to have to change some policies there. So it's got to be a partnership with Julio Frank, Martin Jarman, and Deshaun Foster. To just have Deshaun Foster bear this burden of trying to turn UCLA into a contender without policies by the university, that's going to be a tall order. So I think that's also going to be a fascinating part to see. We all play a role in this. Deshaun has to be a better coach. Martin Jarman has to be a better athletic director, to your point, Will, in terms of raising money and getting people excited. But then Julio Frank has to be able to change the policies in a way that are more friendly to football players. So all three elements, all three individuals play a huge role. And so I think that's also a lens that as fans we need to look at, that it can't just all be on Deshaun. All three of these guys need to be able to play their role moving forward. And if Julio Frank doesn't change those policies, then it's going to be hard as fans to be able to have outsized expectations, right? And then because if those policies don't change, the reality is more investment is needed, more time is needed, more resources are needed, more emphasis is needed to be really good in college football now more than ever. And so that is really something that we need to keep an eye for, because if those policies don't change, then it's hard and unfair, even as fans, to have outsized expectations. Then you have to change what the definition of success is moving forward. And I think these are all the types of questions to think about over the course of this offseason moving forward.
Yeah. And I mean, it's going to be a hard climb to get back to that point. You know, we're starting from scratch next year, as you laid out so perfectly. But this is UCLA, man. This is the school of champions. This is the blue and gold. We've had Kareem, we've had Jackie Robinson, Arthur Ashe. Just what this school means to not only the city of Los Angeles, but to the rest of the world. If any school can get it done, I'm going to put my money on UCLA to figure it out. Man, I just want to take a moment just to say how grateful I am to be able to do this show with you. My emotions have kind of been all over this episode, but it is very emotional, man. It's the last time I'm going to be joining you on this show, and it's been a hell of a run, man. 4 years of putting in awesome work, and just grateful for you coming in every day and making this a show that's fun and intellectually challenging me when it comes to the philosophies of football and how UCLA applies to them, man. So I just want to give you a huge shout out as the best podcast partner I could have ever asked for.
Well, so, I'm going to miss you so deeply. And, you know, we don't know what the future is going to hold here in terms of, you know, this show and content with LAFB moving forward. We'll have those conversations and we'll share it with the fans on the other side of the holidays. So more to come on that. But the one thing I'll say is, you know, you have meant so much to me, and you know that offline. And we're such good friends, and I care about you so deeply that this show is not going to be the same in whatever form this is without you. This is really kind of the end of a chapter for sure. And Will, it has been one of the great honors of my life to be able to be your co-host on this show, and just the ride that we've been on over these last 3 sort of years and 4 seasons, you know, like the 3 years of human time and the 4 seasons of football time. In so many ways, it's been a lifetime of memories. I love you so much, and I'm just so excited about your next steps and just all the success that you're going to have moving forward in this. My heart is empty, and there's a void that will be there moving forward, because you've meant so much to me. You've meant so much to the UCLA fan base. You've meant so much to the Los Angeles Football Network. That there is no replacing Will Decker. You know, you try and figure out how to sort of piece it together moving forward, but there's no replacing Will Decker, because you are one of one, my friend. You're my brother, and you know, we're gonna have so much fun, you know, in life moving forward as well. We're gonna be going to lots of basketball games together and hanging out a ton. But this is sort of the end of a chapter of our podcasting together, and I just root for your success. I'm your biggest fan. I love you so much, and it's certainly a bittersweet day, indeed. More bitter than sweet.
Love you too, man. And it brought me back to some memories. I mean, I went and watched the Sun Bowl video of us having to do it right after the game of, to me, the most disappointing loss of the Chip Kelly era. I know we've had conversations within the network, like which one was the best, which one was the worst. That one right there, man. You know, Nick Patty coming in there. And you and I just had the most backbreaking loss and have to go immediately live after the game. And you could just see it on our faces, just how disgruntled and pissed off we were. And then just the highs. I mean, one of my favorite podcasts I've ever done was when we upset USC last year with Caleb Williams. And you and I, you could just feel the fire coming out of this pod, talking about how proud we were of UCLA coming out there and rallying. So, man, just all those memories sticking with me. And, you know, we're going to do one more show. We are doing a class breakdown for UCLA football and USC. It's going to be more of a dual podcast between Salute to Troy and Bruin Bible. So this will be like the last official Bruin Bible episode. So yeah, man, it's going to be a blast. Thank you guys for everyone tuning in. This means the world. Last episode coming this Wednesday, I believe. So you guys stay tuned for that. Not the last episode of UCLA LAFB covering everything. So you guys stay tuned for whatever they've got in store coming forward. It's going to be awesome. It's going to be great. LA Football Network, one of the best places ever to be as an employer. So love you guys, man. 4's up as always, and we'll be talking very, very soon. Bruins closed the season on a W, 2013 over Fresno State. 4's up.